Morning all. Okay, the Olympiad's over, but there's so many instructive games in there. It was impossible to do justice to the tournaments. I was trying to do 1, 2 or 3 videos a day, but after the third one, my brain was about to. I just couldn't take any more actually. So, but in the mornings, I think there's still potential to look at some of the interesting instructive games. In the final round, there's a crucial game in the Russia versus Germany match. Vladimir Kramnik playing Naiditsch on board 1. So Kramnik 2797, Naiditsch 2712. Let's have a look at this game. So d4 from Vladimir, and we saw Nimzo-Indian after knight c3 bishop b4, and now Vladimir plays knight f3, and we see b6. So with b6, black is trying to increase the influence on the e4 square. White plays queen b3, which looks a little bit odd, trying to encourage maybe the bishop to exchange on c3, but it wouldn't here, with white capturing or just collecting the bishop pair. So black actually plays c5. Okay, I mean I guess it's an option because black will get some tempo on the queen, but c5 was preferred in this position. Now white plays bishop g5 after h6, bishop h4, and now the bishop's kicked again, going back to g3. So with all this kicking, there's some weaknesses created on the king side here. h4 might be useful to Vladimir later in the game. Black plays knight e4 now, and we see e3. Okay, knight c6 putting more pressure on d4, and potentially black has g4 as well to loosen white's control of d4. So it looks a little bit of concern here what black's doing, playing very aggressively here. Bishop d3 is played now, and we see black giving up voluntarily the dark square bishop and then taking on g3 now. Interestingly, and I pause here, it would look as though the logical way to capture the knight is that general rule, you know, capture towards the center. Surprisingly, that's not played in this position, and it looks as though, you know, it looks quite unusual to do this. But FG and now the F file is preferred for the dynamism, so that's an unusual move looking at this game, in my view, to play FG here. But okay, concretely, this F file could be a big problem for black. Black plays queen e7, and now white castles with the rook, just potentially targeting f7 now. Bishop b7, and now rook a e1, as though perhaps e4 and d5 are on the cards later on. Black castles queenside, and now bishop e4. Okay, so this is discouraging knight a5 from black, perhaps, you know, exchange off this bishop. Black plays now f6, and you might wonder, well, what were the options here? What about f5? Is that viable? For example, f5, just to get the light square bishop. Let's have a quick check on this position. f6 or knight, even knight a5 is actually mentioned, but f6, f5, is there a problem with f5? Maybe white can take, and then knight e5. Okay, that looks quite good. If bishop b7 here, there's knight g6, so that could be big trouble for black, this continuation. Okay, so f6 preferred, and now white takes on c6 anyway. Now if bishop takes c6, I guess d5 is useful. In the game, black played d takes c6, blocking in his own bishop. Okay, he's putting a bit more pressure on d4, but it looks like another capture away from the center. So both sides are kind of playing this unusual captures in this game. Let's have a quick check on this position, actually, on the full impact on d5. So if bishop takes c6, is d5 actually even the move? Okay, d5 bishop b7, a4, and there seems to be a fast attack on black's king. King doesn't seem that safe with a5 imminent, so let's say f5 knight d2. It looks as though, okay, a5 here, it looks as though this is quite brutal now, potentially. And also if on ed there's rook f5, okay, technically black has chances though. So okay, so in the game d takes c6 looks a bit anti-positional, and we get this a4 a5 attack anyway, potentially. So a4, black takes on d4, and now not undoubling the pawns, but instead going for the pressure on e6, so keeping the pawns doubled for the pressure on e6. And now after c5 we have a5. Okay, so black's king safety is being undermined here. Queen d6, ab, ab, and now rook f2, as though the rook wants to swing to either a2 or b2. Rook h, e8, and now rook d2 is played. Okay, e5, and this invites the shutting down of the bishop with d5, which is quite interesting. So what's going on here? Why did black play e5? What is white's threat, in fact, here? Let's just check out this position. I guess white was concerned about g4. The rook holding up d4 for the moment means, okay, this rook's then free to move. So if rook d2, is not played here, in this position, you might wonder as well, g4, does it actually work for undermining d4? cd, cd, it's not with check. So in this case, okay, rook e6 or c5 is strong, it seems. Is okay anyway. But in this situation, okay, white plays rook d2 here, supporting d4, and we see e5, and I'm pretty sure that's an evaluation shift, because it looks intuitively as though the bishop's locked out of the game after d5. We look at change in evaluation here. It looks fairly logical. Why would black shut down his own bishop? And that's exactly what he does with e5 in this position. I don't know about you guys looking at this evaluation shift, but just intuitively it looks as though that bishop was okay on the diagonal. Can black not just continue with h5? What's the actual threat that white has here? If rook b1, okay, there's a resource here, bishop e4, using that bishop to just be annoying. So this continuation, it looks okay for black. King c7 to protect b6 doesn't look that bad, but in this continuation it seems as though the bishop is voluntarily shut down. Okay, so e4, maybe the idea is, I don't know, pressure on this diagonal, I don't know. So rook d e2, just pinning that pawn to e8, f5, and now with the bishop shut down it has less influence on e4, and Vladimir simply strikes at the center now with his double pawn with g4, just undermining e4. Temporary pawn sack, and now knight d2, so he's going to get black's center pawn. Okay, black gives it up with e3, so an exchange of rooks. King c7, and this runs into a tactic. There's a horrible threat here of rook e6, which isn't parried with king c7. After rook e6, it's a disaster. It seems if the queen moves back, queen takes b6. Is this actually a clear blunder from black? He seems to have collapsed in the last few moves, playing this e5. Maybe it's just a very, very panicky match, full of nerves, because I don't know, it's a very high stakes match. But king c7, rook e6, unless his deliberate intention is this to get the rook and knight for the queen, but it doesn't seem to be that good looking deeper into it. Maybe that was the intention. Let's see, if black plays a move like h5, is queen e6 still on the cards? Queen f4, because it's not with check taking on b6, this is more palatable. Okay, but in the game, yeah, this queen, okay, if this is deliberate, it looks a bit risky to give up the queen for rook and knight. So this is what happened. Queen takes e6, rook takes d2. So how can white justify the queen? His first move is queen b1. He's going to go for the double attacks like queen h7 to get this pawn, and then he can try and get these pawns maybe. And this pawn's still a bit dangerous, but he's giving up g2. Okay, so that's pretty clever. The king has to go to f1, otherwise he's going to lose the queen to that discovered check. So rook takes h2, check, and now e7, menacing threat. Bishop c6, and he's going to win that bishop now with the check. Now, interestingly, not immediately e8, but and is this a much more powerful move? I wonder how many of us would just play e8 here, queening, just to get the bishop. Vladimir actually plays something different. Can you spot what he plays if I give you 10 seconds? Okay, he keeps his pawn for a moment with queen f7 threatening this. Is this a much more powerful move than e8, this little subtlety of the way of winning the bishop? Not really. e8 is also good, apparently. Queen f7 is good as well, but okay, if we leave this running, e8 versus queen f7 doesn't actually matter. It seems white is doing very well in either case here, but queen f7 is actually okay liked as well. So check, check, check. He throws in a few checks, and Vladimir wins this bishop now. So it's queen versus rook and these pawns. Okay, and black resigns here. It seems, I don't know, it seems like a last round nerves game, the way black played this. To shut down his own bishop like that in particular, it seems a bit shocking, but let's do an overview and summary of this game. So a Nimzo-Indian, where black commits now, instead of taking on c3, which I think it is actually very common, just to try and use the tempo gains. So it would be like a queen c2 line. It's just the queen being harassed there is a slight advantage. The queen harassing the bishop is a slight advantage over the queen c2 line. So c5. So we saw bishop g5. An energetic play from black, but it's creating potential weaknesses. The funny thing is, usually you'd expect captures towards the center, but actually fg being played here was the first interesting kind of, you could say sort of anti-positional pawn capture, but the dynamism is shown to be just as respected by Vladimir in this game, and this bishop takes c6, you know, removing the possibilities of knight a5 for good. D takes c6 looks pretty dynamic here as well, but otherwise bishop c6 d5. But this queen is also just naturally justified on the b file now against black's king. So this attack is just ready made with the queen there. Black again refusing to capture in the more sort of positional manner to undouble this pawn. Sorry, white refusing to play cd, but rather ed, again going for, it seems, dynamic pressure. So he's got potentially dynamic pressure on both of these pawns in this scenario, and that's very, very interesting. These games are real eye openers, because you'd expect someone like Vladimir to be more classical positional play, but his play is full of dynamics, really. You know, he's going for the king here with a5, weakening the king. Okay, he's making this offering of the d4 pawn, you know, for g4 on the cards, and maybe, you know, that was one of black's better moves here, because the knight on h4 might not be that brilliant. I think it was actually one of Black's better moves to just go for this g4. Well, it was mentioned briefly there. It was mentioned briefly. Okay, g4 now. Okay, it's a small advantage for white still, but Black didn't do that. He didn't dislodge that knight. I guess he can still do that here, but you know, maybe the knight's quite dangerous on h4. I guess. Why would he be committed to a knight on h4? Let's actually investigate here. G4 just briefly, because he's actually ruled out knight d2 as a retreat. So if g4, knight h4, if we look at this position, you'd think, well, the bishop does look nice, but Black's king safety is a bit suspect. Queen c6, the knight naturally protects g2, that's one advantage. Let's go with this. Now shutting down the diagonal. So do we see in this position that if this knight's bad, this bishop's bad, basically? And what about this f5 square? The knight is threatening the piercing knight f5, which means shutting down the bishop is supported indirectly by this knight. So ed knight f5 is actually annoying in this position. So it's not all bad, that knight, if it supports the d5 break. So there's some subtleties here of concrete variations. Making g4, although tempting to put a knight on the rim, another kind of anti-positional concept, but is actually, you know, good for d5 to blunt out the bishop, it seems, in that variation anyway. So the bishop's blunted out anyway, and okay, this is a very important move, otherwise where does the knight go? So it has to pin that pawn. And now this undermining stuff, which gives white access on the e file, in particular the entry point e6 is horrible to contest. The bishop's now blunted out, the queen's like tied down. I mean, Naiditsch is a great player, 27-12. He's not, you know, he's less than the 100-point threshold away from Vladimir, but Vladimir seems to have such a big grip on the position here. You know, he's achieved a lot of positional aims through seemingly strange dynamic moves. So now, you know, winning the queen for the two pieces, doesn't mind his pawns getting mopped up. He's just winning that bishop now with this e7. Okay, and Black doesn't play on here. Well, there's an immediate threat actually in this position of queen a8 mate. So if g3, queen a8, and if the king moves back, actually, do we have menacing checks that the rook's loose in this particular scenario? Maybe let's just follow this through a few moves just to make sure we're aware of the winning plan. So say king a7, check. Alright, it would help if we get the rook away from being munged here. Is that actually possible? That's the question. So say check, king c2, we're throwing another check. You can move to get away from... No, it looks as though in these variations it's just dropping off. Can the rook not go anywhere without dropping off the board in this position? What about g3? There's just queen a8, mate. I think the rook is just dropping off the board here. Where does it go? We've just seen in this variant, there's queen a8 again. Nope. It's hopeless. The rook is dropping off the board. If we leave it on, if we put it on h1, it's going to drop off with queen c6. So that I guess is why Black resigned in the final position. It's actually worse than it looks here. The pawns have, not only have the pawns got no chance, the rook is also badly placed. Okay, hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.